The day my son, Christopher, looked me in the eye and told me it was time for me to pack my bags. Well, that was the coldest day of my life. I had given that boy everything: my time, my love, and even $320,000 from my own retirement to pay off his mortgage in full. I thought I was securing a place to grow old with my granddaughter, Maya. But then, his mother-in-law needed a room, and suddenly, I was treated like a piece of old furniture that just did not fit the decor anymore. I did not argue. I did not cry in front of them. Instead, I quietly packed my things and left a small white envelope on the kitchen island. It was a gift they would not truly understand until it was far too late. My name is Evelyn. I am 72 years old, and this is how I learned that respect is not a gift. It is a requirement. Before I tell you the rest of this story and how I reclaimed my life, I would love to know, what city or state are you watching from today? Please leave a comment below. It truly helps our community grow. I remember the day I sold my house in Connecticut. It was a beautiful, white colonial with blue shutters, the kind of home you see on a postcard. My husband, Arthur, and I had lived there for over 40 years. We raised our son, Christopher, within those walls. I could still see the faint pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe where we tracked his height every single birthday. After Arthur passed away, the house felt too big. The silence was heavy. It was like the walls were waiting for a sound that was never going to come. So, when Christopher suggested that I move in with him and his wife, Amanda, in Virginia, I felt a glimmer of hope. I thought my prayers had been answered. I did not want to be a burden, but I also did not want to spend my final years talking to the walls. I made a decision that many people told me was risky. I sold that beautiful home. I sold my memories. I sold the garden I had tended for decades. When the sale was finalized, I was sitting on a net profit of $320,000. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office, holding that check in my trembling hands. I looked at Christopher. He was my only child, my pride and joy. He had been struggling with his mortgage payments after a bad business investment. I saw the stress in his eyes. I saw the way his shoulders slumped. As a mother, your instinct is always to protect your child. It does not matter if they are 5 years old or 45 years old. You just want them to be okay. So, I told him, Christopher, I am going to pay off your mortgage. All of it. The look on his face was worth every penny. He hugged me so tight I could hardly breathe. He told me I was his hero. He told me that I would always have a home with them. He promised me that I would never be alone again. I wrote that check for the full $320,000. I handed it over with a heart full of love and a sense of peace. I thought I was buying my way into a happy family life. I thought I was securing my place at the dinner table and my place in the heart of my granddaughter, Maya. We moved my furniture into their guest suite. It was a lovely room with a view of the woods. For the first few months, it was perfect. I helped Amanda with the cooking. I picked up Maya from school. We would sit on the porch in the evenings, drinking sweet tea and watching the fireflies. I felt useful. I felt loved. I felt like I had finally found my place in the world again. But as the months went by, the gratitude started to fade. The thank you notes stopped. The hugs became shorter. I started to notice that I was not a guest in the house. I was becoming a servant, but I did not mind. I loved them. I thought that sacrifice was just what mothers did. I had no idea that the very roof I had paid for would soon be used to shelter the people who would break my heart. The honeymoon phase of our living arrangement did not last as long as I had hoped. It started with small things. Little comments that felt like tiny thorns pricking at my skin. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the kitchen, preparing my grandmother's recipe for beef stew. It was a smell that always reminded me of home. Amanda walked in, waving her hand in front of her nose as if she had walked into a cloud of smoke. "Evelyn," she said, her voice thin and sharp. "Do we have to have that smell in the house? It's so heavy. Christopher and I are trying to move toward a more plant-based diet. And besides, The kitchen feels so cluttered when you're in here doing all this heavy cooking. I apologized. I felt a knot in my stomach, but I tucked it away. I started to notice that Amanda was rearranging the living room. My favorite armchair, the one Arthur had bought me for our 30th anniversary, was moved into the garage. She told me it clashed with her new modern aesthetic. The house needs to feel fresh, Evelyn, she told me. It's about the flow of energy. Your old things, they just block the light. I started spending more time in my room. I did not want to block the light. But then, the real trouble began. Amanda's mother, Mrs. Gable, lost her condo in Florida. She had made some poor financial choices, and suddenly, she had nowhere to go. I remember the night Mrs. Gable arrived. She came with 10 suitcases and a sour expression. She did not say hello. She did not thank me for the dinner I had prepared. She simply looked around the house and said, "It's a bit smaller than I expected, Christopher." Suddenly, there were 2 grandmothers under one roof, but we were not treated equally. Mrs. Gable was the guest of honor. I was the one who was expected to move my things to make room for her craft supplies. I was the one who was told to be quiet when she was napping. I saw the way Amanda and her mother whispered in the kitchen. They would stop talking the moment I walked into the room. It is a terrible feeling, to feel like an intruder in a house that you paid for, to feel like you are being watched and judged in your own home. Maya, my sweet granddaughter, started to notice too. One day, she came into my room and asked, "Nana, why is Mommy always cross with you? And why does Grandma Gable get the big chair?" I didn't know what to tell her. I just hugged her and told her that everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. The cracks were getting wider every single day. Amanda started talking about Maya needing a bigger playroom. She talked about how the house felt cramped with so many adults. She never said it directly to my face, but I knew what she was doing. She was laying the groundwork. She was planting the seeds of my departure. And Christopher? My son? The boy I had sacrificed everything for? He just looked at the floor. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was a man caught between his mother and his wife, and I could see. Slowly but surely, he was choosing the side that made his life easier. He was choosing to forget the $320,000. He was choosing to forget the promise he made to me. The atmosphere in the house became cold. Colder than a Virginia winter. I realized then that I was no longer a mother or a grandmother in that house. I was just an obstacle. An obstacle that Amanda and her mother were determined to remove. Sunday evenings used to be my favorite time of the week. In our old house in Connecticut, Arthur and I would listen to jazz on the radio and share a bottle of wine while the pot roast finished in the oven. But this Sunday felt different. The air in the house was thick. It was heavy with the things that were being left unsaid. I had finished my dinner early and retreated to my room. I didn't feel welcome at the table anymore. I could hear the clinking of silverware from the dining room. I heard Mrs. Gable's loud, piercing laugh. I heard Amanda's hushed whispers. And then I heard the footsteps. Heavy, hesitant. I knew those footsteps. They belonged to my son, Christopher. He knocked softly on my door. When he walked in, he would not look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on a framed photograph of our old house that sat on my dresser. He looked like a man who was about to deliver bad news. He sat on the edge of my bed, fidgeting with his wedding ring. "Mom," he began. His voice was scratchy. "Amanda and I, well, we've been doing a lot of talking. About the future. About the family." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I sat up straighter in my chair. "Go on, Christopher," I said. My voice was steady, even though my heart was racing. "It is about Mrs. Gable," he continued. "Her health is not great. She needs more care than we expected. And with Maya growing so fast, and, well, Amanda is pregnant again, Mom. We are going to need the extra space. We are going to need this room for the new baby." He finally looked at me, but his eyes were empty. We looked into that new senior living community over on Oak Street. It is very high-end, very luxurious. They have a garden, a library, and people your own age to talk to. We think you would be much happier there. I felt like he had slapped me across the face. Christopher, I said softly. I paid for this house. I gave you $320,000 to save this roof over your head. I sold my entire life to ensure I would have a place here with you. You cannot just put me out. He shook his head, looking frustrated now. Mom, nobody is putting you out. It is not like that. We just need to rearrange things. Mrs. Gable needs to be on this floor because of her hip. Amanda needs a nursery. It is just rearranging. That is all. Rearranging. He used that word like it was a harmless thing. Like he was moving a lamp from one table to another. But he wasn't moving a lamp. He was moving his mother. He was moving the woman who had sacrificed her retirement so he wouldn't lose his home. And my money? Christopher? I asked. The $320,000? Do you plan to pay me back so I can afford this luxury community you speak of? He let out a long, tired sigh. Mom, don't be like that. We thought that money was a gift. A way for you to help your son. We don't have that kind of cash lying around. You know that. Besides, we are family. Family helps each other without keeping a scoreboard. I looked at him. Truly looked at him. I saw the cowardice in his eyes. I saw the influence of Amanda and Mrs. Gable. I realized that my son was gone. The boy I had raised, the man who promised to take care of me, he had been replaced by a stranger. A stranger who was willing to cast his mother aside for the sake of convenience. I see, I said. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I see exactly what this is. Christopher stood up, looking relieved that the conversation was over. Good. I am glad you understand. We will help you move your things next weekend. It is for the best, Mom. Truly. He walked out and closed the door. I sat there in the dark for a long time. The silence was louder than any scream. Rearranging. That word kept echoing in my mind. Rearranging. I realized then that if they wanted to play a game of strategy, I was more than ready to make my move. The next morning, the house felt like a crime scene. I could hear Amanda and Mrs. Gable in the kitchen, their voices bright and cheerful. They were already planning how to redecorate my room. They were talking about wallpaper samples and new curtains. They were acting as if I was already gone. As if I were a ghost haunting a house that no longer belonged to me. I walked into the kitchen to get a cup of coffee. Amanda gave me a tight, fake smile. Good morning, Evelyn. Christopher told me you guys had a good talk. I am so glad we are all on the same page. It is going to be so much better for everyone. I didn't say a word. I just nodded and took my coffee back to my room. My silence seemed to make them nervous. They wanted me to be angry. They wanted me to cry and plead so they could feel justified in calling me difficult. But I gave them nothing. I sat at my small desk and pulled out my old leather-bound address book. I found the number I was looking for. It was the number for my old family lawyer, Mr. Henderson. I had known him for 30 years. He was the one who handled the sale of my house in Connecticut. He was also the one who suggested something very important when I told him I was giving the money to my son. I called him. We spoke for nearly an hour. As I listened to his voice, a sense of calm washed over me. I realized that I was not as helpless as Christopher thought I was. I was not just a grandmother with a suitcase. I was a woman with a plan. Over the next 3 days, I did not argue. I did not complain. When Amanda asked if I wanted help packing, I simply said, "No, thank you. I can manage." I spent my afternoons quietly visiting a small, charming apartment complex on the other side of town. It was modest, but it was clean and quiet. It was far away from the whispers and the judgment. I used the small amount of savings I had tucked away in my private account to pay the deposit and the first month of rent. At night, while the house was asleep, I began to organize my documents. I looked at the paper Mr. Henderson had prepared for me years ago. It was a promissory note. It was a legal document that stated the $320,000 was a loan, secured by a lien on the property. Christopher had signed it in the excitement of receiving the money. He probably hadn't even read it. He thought his mother was just being old-fashioned with her paperwork. He thought I would never use it against him. He thought my love for him made me weak. But love and respect are two different things. I loved my son, but I could no longer respect the man he had become. And I would not allow myself to be treated like an inconvenience. I watched Christopher from the window as he mowed the lawn. I saw him laughing with Maya. My heart ached for my granddaughter. She was the innocent one in all of this. But I knew that if I stayed, I would only be teaching her that it is okay to let people walk all over you. I had to teach her a different lesson. I had to show her that a woman, no matter her age, has the right to stand up for herself. On my final night in the house, I didn't pack my pride. I packed my resolve. I sat at the kitchen table late at night, long after the others had gone to bed. I wrote a short note. It was not a long letter of grievances. It was just a few simple sentences. I placed the note inside a large white envelope. Along with the note, I placed a copy of the legal lien and a formal demand for payment. I felt a strange sense of peace as I sealed that envelope. It was the peace that comes when you finally stop being a victim and start being the architect of your own fate. I looked around the kitchen one last time. I had paid for those granite countertops. I had paid for that high-end refrigerator. I had paid for the very floor I was standing on. Rearranging, I whispered to the empty room. Yes, Christopher, we are certainly going to do some rearranging. I went back to my room and slept better than I had in years. The silence was no longer heavy. It was full of possibilities. The next 3 days were some of the busiest and quietest days of my entire life. To Christopher and Amanda, I was just a defeated old woman, slowly tucking her life into cardboard boxes. They saw me moving with a heavy heart. They saw me looking at the walls with sadness. What they did not see was the fire burning in my spirit. They did not see that I was no longer a victim. I was a woman on a mission. I had to be careful, very careful. Christopher was at the office from 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening. Amanda was usually busy taking her mother, Mrs. Gable, to various appointments or shopping for the new nursery. This gave me the windows of time I needed. I started with the things they wouldn't miss. My books, my winter clothes, the old photo albums that Amanda thought were just clutter. I packed them into small boxes, making sure they weren't too heavy for me to carry. Every time I walked to my car, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was 72 years old, and here I was, sneaking around my own home. The home I had paid for. It felt absurd. It felt wrong. But it was necessary. I drove those boxes to my new apartment on the other side of town. It was a modest place in a quiet building. It only had 1 bedroom and a kitchen that was much smaller than the one I was leaving behind. But when I turned the key in that lock, I felt a surge of air in my ears. This was my space. No one could tell me where to sit. No one could tell me that my cooking smelled too strong. No one could tell me that I didn't fit the decor. I paid the deposit and the first month of rent using my Social Security money. For years, I had been handing that money over to Christopher to help with the groceries and the utilities. I had been happy to do it. I thought I was contributing to a family. I never realized that I was simply paying for the privilege of being disrespected. Well, that stopped now. Every penny of my Social Security would now go toward my own peace of mind. Back at the house, I was a ghost. I spoke very little. When Amanda asked me if I was excited about the senior living community on Oak Street, I simply nodded. Yes, Amanda, I said. I am sure it will be exactly what I deserve. She didn't catch the edge in my voice. She was too busy looking at wallpaper samples. She was too busy dreaming about the perfect life she was going to have once I was out of her way. On the second night, I sat at my small desk and pulled out the legal documents Mr. Henderson had sent over. My hands were steady as I reviewed the promissory note. $320,000. It was a lot of money. It was the price of a lifetime of hard work. It was the money Arthur and I had saved through decades of early mornings and late nights. Christopher had signed that note 4 years ago. He had been so grateful then. He had called it a lifesaver. He had promised to pay it back if the house was ever sold or if our living arrangement changed. Well, the arrangement was certainly changing. I also had the notice of lien. It was a formal document that declared my legal interest in the property. Christopher thought he owned that house, free and clear. He thought he was the king of the castle. He forgot that the bank wasn't the only one that had a stake in those four walls. I thought about the word Christopher had used. Rearranging. It was such a cold, clinical word. It was a word you used for furniture, not for your mother. I repeated it to myself as I tucked the legal papers into a crisp, white envelope. Rearranging. By the third day, my room was nearly empty. I had left behind the heavy furniture, the bed, the dresser, the large armchair that Amanda hated so much. I didn't need them. I wanted a fresh start. I wanted to surround myself with things that didn't hold the scent of betrayal. I looked at the bare walls of the room that had been my sanctuary for 4 years. I thought about the many nights I had spent there, feeling lonely even though my family was just on the other side of the door. I realized that being alone in my new apartment would be far less lonely than being ignored in this big house. I checked my watch. It was nearly 5 o'clock. Christopher would be home soon. Amanda and Mrs. Gable were already back, and I could hear them laughing in the kitchen. They were celebrating. They were happy because tomorrow was the day I was supposed to move into the senior living facility. They had no idea that I wasn't going to Oak Street. They had no idea that by this time tomorrow their entire world was going to be turned upside down. I felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even a desire for revenge. It was just a desire for justice. I had given everything I had to my son. I had offered him my heart and my home. He had chosen to take the money and throw away the mother. I placed the white envelope on the kitchen island, right where he would see it when he came in for his morning coffee. I weighed it down with my spare set of house keys. I took one last look at the kitchen. The granite countertops, the high-end appliances, the beautiful hardwood floors. "Enjoy it while you can, Christopher," I whispered. I walked out the front door, got into my Buick, and drove away. I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I kept my eyes on the road ahead. For the first time in years, the road looked wide and bright. I was 72 years old. I was starting over with nothing but my social security and a legal document. But as I drove toward my new life, I had never felt more powerful. The secret exodus was over. Tomorrow, the real rearrangement would begin. The house was quiet on that final Tuesday morning. A heavy, hollow kind of quiet. Christopher had already left for the office. Amanda had taken her mother, Mrs. Gable, out for a celebratory breakfast and a morning of shopping for nursery furniture. They were so excited to start their new life without me. They didn't even say goodbye when they pulled out of the driveway. They just assumed I would be waiting there for the movers they had hired to take me to the senior living facility. But I was not waiting. I stood in the center of the kitchen, the heart of the home. The morning sun was streaming through the large windows, hitting the granite countertops I had paid for with my own sweat and blood. I looked at the coffee maker. I looked at the stools pulled up to the island. I thought about all the breakfasts I had made for them. All the times I had sat there, listening to Christopher talk about his day, thinking we were a team. I realized then that a house is just wood and stone. It is the love inside that makes it a home. And the love in this house had grown cold long ago. My car was already packed. It was just a few small boxes in the trunk of my Buick. I didn't need much. I had my clothes. I had my important papers. I had the small jewelry box that Arthur had given me for our 25th anniversary. Those were the things that mattered. Everything else was just stuff. I took a deep breath and pulled the large white envelope out of my purse. I had spent the previous night making sure everything was in order. My hands did not shake. I felt a strange, cold clarity. I placed the envelope right in the center of the mahogany kitchen island. It was impossible to miss. On the front of the envelope, I had written one name in clear, bold letters: Christopher. Next to the envelope, I placed my spare set of house keys. I heard the metal clink against the stone. It sounded so final, like the closing of a book. Inside that envelope sat a letter. It was not a long letter. I did not waste my time telling him how much he had hurt me. I did not waste my breath reminding him of the sacrifices I had made. He knew those things. He simply chose to ignore them. Instead, the letter contained a simple statement. I wrote that I was leaving and that I would not be going to the Oak Street facility. I told him that I was reclaiming my independence. And then, I directed his attention to the second document in the envelope. That second document was the real gift. It was a formal notice of default. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, had made it very clear. Since Christopher had decided to change our living arrangement, the very arrangement that was the condition of my $320,000 loan, the entire balance was now due. Immediately, Christopher thought he was being clever. He thought he could use the word rearranging to hide the fact that he was breaking his promise. But the law does not care about clever words. The law cares about contracts. And I had a contract. I stood there for a moment, looking at the envelope. I thought about the $320,000. That money represented 40 years of Arthur's hard work at the insurance firm. It represented all the vacations we didn't take and the new cars we didn't buy, so we could save for a comfortable retirement. Christopher had treated that money like it was his birthright. He had treated it like a gift that came with no strings attached. But in this world, everything has a price. And the price of his betrayal was going to be very high. I walked toward the front door. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors. I remembered the day we moved in here. Christopher had carried me over the threshold as a joke, telling me that I was the queen of the house. We had laughed so hard. Maya had been just a baby then, sleeping in her carrier. Where did that boy go? How does a son turn into a man who can look at his mother and see an inconvenience? I didn't have the answer. And I realized I didn't need it anymore. I stepped out onto the front porch and pulled the door shut behind me. I heard the lock click into place. I didn't look back. I walked down the driveway to my Buick. The air was crisp and smelled of autumn. It was a beautiful day to start over. I got into the car, adjusted my rearview mirror, and started the engine. As I pulled away from the curb, I saw Amanda's car turning the corner at the end of the street. She was coming back with her mother, probably with a car full of expensive baby clothes and nursery decorations. She didn't see me. She was laughing, her head tossed back, looking as happy as a woman could be. I smiled to myself as I drove toward the highway. I knew exactly what was going to happen. Within an hour, she would walk into that kitchen. She would see the envelope. She would call Christopher. And the rearranging they had planned so carefully was going to turn into a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully pushed an old woman into a corner where she would quietly fade away. But they forgot one very important thing. Never underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose and everything to gain. I turned on the radio. A classic song from my youth was playing. I hummed along as I headed toward my new, small, beautiful life. I was 72 years old, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely and utterly free. Christopher had his house, for now, but he was about to find out that a roof is very hard to keep when you have burned the bridge that leads to it. The cliffhanger wasn't just for them, it was for me too. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing for certain. The bills were coming due, and I was finally ready to collect. It had been 7 days since I walked out of that house. 7 days of silence. 7 days of peace. I was sitting in my new living room, sipping a cup of Earl Grey tea. The morning sun was warming my toes. My new apartment was small, but it was filled with light. I had my books. I had my quiet. I had my dignity. For the first time in years, I did not have to wake up wondering if I was in someone's way. Then, my phone began to vibrate on the coffee table. I looked down. It was Christopher. I let it ring. 1, 2, 3 times. I wanted him to feel the weight of the silence. I wanted him to remember the way he had ignored me in my own home. On the 4th ring, I finally picked up. "Hello, Christopher," I said. My voice was as calm as a mountain lake. "Mom? Mom, is that you?" His voice was frantic. It was high-pitched and shaky. He sounded like a little boy who had just realized he was lost in the woods. "Yes, it is me," I replied. "Mom, what is going on?" "I just got home and there was a man here. A process server. He handed me these papers. And the bank. The bank called me this morning. They said there is a problem with the title. They said the house is being flagged. They mentioned a lien, Mom." "A lien? What does that even mean?" I took a slow sip of my tea. I could hear Amanda in the background, her voice sharp and hysterical, asking him who he was talking to. "It means exactly what the papers say, Christopher," I told him. "But they said we could lose the house," he shouted. I could hear the desperation in his breath. "They said if we don't pay $320,000 within 30 days, they will start the foreclosure process. Mom, this has to be a mistake. You paid off the mortgage. You gave us that money. We don't owe anyone anything." I leaned back in my chair. I remembered the cold way he had told me it was time for me to pack. I remembered him calling my life savings a gift so he wouldn't have to feel guilty about kicking me out. "I did pay off the mortgage, Christopher. That is true. But I never said it was a gift. Do you remember those papers you signed in the lawyer's office 4 years ago? The ones you didn't bother to read because you were too busy celebrating your good fortune?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his heavy breathing. "You signed a promissory note, Christopher. A legal, binding contract. That money was a loan, secured by the very house you are standing in. And since you decided that I was no longer welcome in that house, well, the terms of the loan have changed. The balance is now due. In full." "Mom, please," he begged. "We don't have that money. We spent everything on the nursery and the new car and Mrs. Gable's medical bills. You can't do this to us. Amanda is pregnant. We have Maya to think about." I felt a twinge of sadness for Maya. But then I remembered how Amanda had looked at me, like I was trash. I remembered Christopher standing by and doing nothing while I was humiliated. "You should have thought about Maya before you decided to make her grandmother homeless," I said. I hung up the phone. I didn't wait for him to respond. I didn't want to hear his excuses. I stood up and walked to the window. The world was still turning. The birds were still singing. Christopher had finally realized that his choices had a price. And that price was exactly $320,000. The next morning, Christopher was at my door. He looked terrible. His eyes were red. His suit was wrinkled. He looked like a man who had not slept a single minute. I didn't let him inside. I stood in the doorway, my arms crossed. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, his voice cracking. "Amanda is a mess. Mrs. Gable is threatening to leave. The bank is being very aggressive. Please tell me this is just a way to get back at us for the senior living thing. Tell me you'll withdraw the lien." I looked at him. Truly looked at him. "This isn't about revenge, Christopher. This is about business and respect." "But it's $320,000, he cried out. "Where am I supposed to get that kind of money in 30 days? We are family." I stepped out onto the small landing. Family. That is an interesting word, Christopher. You used it to justify taking my money. You used it to justify taking my room. But you didn't use it when you were planning my exit behind my back. I took a deep breath. It was time for him to understand the reality of his situation. "Here is the truth, Christopher. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, made sure everything was done correctly. When I handed you that check for $320,000, it was recorded as a private loan. It was recorded as a secured lien against the deed of the house." Christopher shook his head, looking like he wanted to wake up from a bad dream. But I thought you were just helping us. I thought you wanted us to be happy." "I did," I said. "And I would have never asked for a penny of that money back as long as I had a home and a family who loved me. But you decided that I was an inconvenience. You decided that Mrs. Gable's comfort was more important than my sacrifice. You broke the agreement, Christopher." "Not me. I leaned in a little closer. I am 72 years old. I have worked hard my entire life. That money represents every hour Arthur spent at the office. It represents the house we built together. It is not just paper. It is my security. And I will not let you throw it away for a new nursery or a mother-in-law who doesn't even like you. Christopher slumped against the railing. The bank says if I can't pay you, they will sell the house at auction to satisfy the debt. We will have nothing, Mom. Nothing. I felt a coldness in my heart that surprised even me. Then I suppose you will have to do exactly what you told me to do. You will have to. Rearrange. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with shock. He recognized his own words. He saw the mirror I was holding up to his face. Rearrange your finances, Christopher, I continued. Rearrange your priorities. Maybe Mrs. Gable has some money hidden away. Maybe Amanda can sell that new car. But one way or another, I want my $320,000, plus interest. You're really going to do this? He whispered. You're really going to take our house? I am not taking your house, I replied firmly. I am taking back my life. You are the one who chose the house over your mother. Now, you have to live with that choice. I stepped back into my apartment and closed the door. I locked it. The sound of the deadbolt was a final period at the end of a long, painful sentence. I walked into my small kitchen and started to prepare lunch. I felt a sense of satisfaction that I hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't because I wanted them to suffer. It was because for the first time in my life, I had stood up for myself. I had demanded the respect I deserved. The truth about the $320,000 was simple. It was the price of my freedom, and it was worth every single cent. The days that followed were filled with a strange kind of silence. For me, it was the silence of a clean conscience. For Christopher, I knew it was the silence of a man watching his world crumble. He called me every single evening. At first he was angry. Then he was bargaining. By the end of the second week, he was begging. I remember sitting on my balcony one Tuesday afternoon. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows over the park across the street. My phone rang. It was him. Mom, he whispered. He sounded like he had been crying. You have to listen to me. This is not just about the money anymore. Amanda, she is having a very difficult pregnancy. The stress from the bank is making her sick. And Mrs. Gable. She has already moved all her things into your old room. She is settled in. We cannot just tell her to leave. We cannot sell this house. It would destroy our family. I listened to him breathe. I could almost see him in that house. The house with the high ceilings and the expensive curtains. The house that was built on my sacrifice. Christopher, I said. My voice was steady. I understand that things are difficult, but I also remember a Sunday evening not too long ago. I remember standing in that very room you are talking about. I remember telling you that I had nowhere else to go. I remember telling you that I had put every cent of my life savings into that roof. I know, Mom, he interrupted. I know. I made a mistake. I was under a lot of pressure from Amanda. But please, have mercy. We are talking about $320,000. Where am I supposed to find that? If we sell the house, we will have nothing left. We will be starting from zero with a new baby on the way. I took a deep breath. I thought about the word he had used. Mercy. He wanted mercy from the mother he had treated like an inconvenience. He wanted compassion from the woman he had tried to hide away in a senior living facility. Christopher, I said, and I made sure to pause. Do you remember what you told me? When I told you that I didn't want to leave my home? You told me it wasn't a bad thing. You told me it was just rearranging. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. I am simply following your lead, son, I continued. I am rearranging my assets. I am rearranging my life so that I am protected. I spent decades putting you first. I spent my retirement to make sure you were successful. But you taught me a very valuable lesson. You taught me that I need to look out for myself because no one else is going to do it for me. Mom, please, he sobbed. Amanda's mother is on the couch. There is no room for everyone if we move to a smaller place. It will be a nightmare. Then it sounds like you have some very difficult choices to make, I replied. Maybe Mrs. Gable can help you with the loan. Or maybe Amanda can sell some of those expensive things she bought for the house. But the debt is real, Christopher. The bank has already processed the lien. In 15 days they will move to the next step. I didn't feel joy in his pain. I didn't feel a sense of glee. What I felt was a cold, hard clarity. For years, I had allowed myself to be a doormat because I loved him. I had confused love with silence. I had confused being a good mother with being a victim. But no more. I am going to hang up now, Christopher, I said. I have a dinner reservation with some new friends. I wish you the best of luck with your rearranging. I pressed the end call button. I felt a surge of strength in my chest. It was the strength of a woman who had finally found her voice. Christopher had thought he could take my money and my dignity and give me nothing in return. He thought my love was a weakness he could exploit. But he forgot that the same hands that rocked his cradle were the hands that worked for 40 years to earn that $320,000. He forgot that I was a woman who had survived the loss of my husband and the loss of my home. I was not a piece of old furniture. I was the foundation. And when you pull the foundation out from under a house, it does not matter how beautiful the curtains are. The whole thing comes down. As I walked to my closet to pick out a dress for dinner, I realized that the nightmare Christopher was living was a nightmare of his own making. Every choice he had made, from the moment he asked me to move in, had led to this. He was finally feeling the weight of his own choices. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to carry that weight for him. The 30-day deadline came and went. Christopher could not find the money. Of course he couldn't. He had spent his life living beyond his means, using my generosity as a safety net. But the net was gone. The house was put on the market as a forced sale to satisfy the debt. It sold quickly. It was a beautiful house after all. A house that I had paid for. When the legal fees were paid and the bank was satisfied, a check for $320,000, plus the interest my lawyer had insisted upon, was deposited into my account. I remember the day I saw that balance in my bank book. I sat in a little cafe, drinking a latte and looking at the numbers. $320,000. It felt like a mountain of freedom. I heard from a mutual friend that Christopher, Amanda, and Mrs. Gable had moved into a small, cramped, two-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. It is the kind of place where you can hear the neighbors through the walls. It is the kind of place where Amanda's mother has to sleep on a pull-out sofa in the living room because there is no extra room. The lifestyle they had built on my back was gone. The fancy cars were sold. The granite countertops and the mahogany island were now being enjoyed by a young family who actually appreciated them. Christopher tried to call me one last time to ask for a portion of the money to help with the new baby. I told him that I would be setting up a modest college fund for Maya and the new child. The money would be held in a trust that they could not touch. I would make sure my grandchildren were taken care of. But as for him and Amanda, I told him that they were young and healthy. They had plenty of time to learn the value of $1. They had plenty of time to learn how to build a life without using someone else as a stepping stone. And then, I did something I had dreamed of doing for years. I went to a travel agent. I told her I wanted to see the world. In the last 6 months, I have seen the sunset over the Mediterranean Sea. I have walked the cobblestone streets of Rome. I have taken a cruise through the glaciers of Alaska. I am no longer the woman who sits in a guest room, waiting for someone to notice her. I am the woman who wakes up in a new city and wonders what adventure the day will bring. I have made new friends. Real friends. People my own age who have their own stories of struggle and triumph. We don't talk about being a burden. We talk about being alive. Sometimes, when I am sitting on the deck of a ship, looking out at the endless blue horizon, I think about that envelope I left on the kitchen island. I think about the look on Christopher's face when he realized that his rearranging had cost him everything. I don't hate him. I truly don't. I hope that one day he will become the man I thought I was raising. I hope he learns that respect is the most valuable currency in the world. But I also know that I am not responsible for his happiness. I am only responsible for mine. My life didn't end when my son kicked me out of my home. It didn't end when my husband passed away. It didn't end when I turned 70. In fact, it feels like my life has just begun. I am Evelyn. I am 72 years old. I am independent. I have traveled. And I am worth so much more than a spare room. To anyone out there who feels like they are being pushed into a corner, to anyone who feels like their sacrifices are being forgotten, I want you to remember my story. Do not be afraid to stand up. Do not be afraid to use your voice. And never, ever let someone else tell you what you are worth. Because sometimes, the best way to teach the world a lesson is to live a life that is so bright and so full that they can't help but see what they lost. I am finally home. And this time, the home is inside of me. As I sit here today, looking back on everything that has happened over the past few months, I do not feel anger anymore. Instead, I feel a strange and beautiful sense of clarity. Life has a funny way of teaching us exactly what we need, even when the lesson is painful. I truly thought I needed that big house in Virginia. I thought I needed to be surrounded by my son and his family to feel safe in my golden years. But I was wrong. I was so very wrong. I realized that a house is just wood and stone and granite countertops. It does not have a heart, and it certainly cannot give you the respect you deserve. My son, Christopher, learned a very hard lesson about the weight of his choices. He learned that you cannot build a life of luxury on the back of someone else's sacrifice, especially not your own mother's. I want to speak directly to those of you who might be feeling a little bit as I did. Maybe you feel like you are being pushed to the side. Maybe you feel like your hard-earned savings and your years of love are being taken for granted. Please, hear my voice when I tell you this. You are worth so much more than a spare room. You are worth more than a corner in someone else's life. Do not be afraid to stand up for yourself. Do not be afraid to use the law to protect what is yours. Respect is not a gift that your children give to you out of charity. It is a requirement. I am now 72 years old, and my life did not end when I walked out of that house. It actually just began. I am traveling, I am meeting new people, and I am finally the architect of my own happiness. Before we say goodbye today, I would love to hear from you. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your own dignity? Or have you seen a friend go through something similar? Please, leave a comment below. Your stories and your wisdom are what make this community so special. Note: while this story was crafted for your entertainment and to share important life lessons, the message of self-worth and the importance of legal protection for seniors is very real. We should all value our voices and our rights. If you found strength in my story today, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel. It helps us share these important voices of wisdom and justice with more people around the world. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being part of this journey with me. May you always find the respect and the peace you deserve. Goodbye for now.